So this is accessibility and metadata, how alt text affects the Samvera community. I'm Anne-Marie Close. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And the second half of the presentation will be given by Julie Hardesty at Indiana University. So first off, like a lot of academic institutions, our universities have accessibility mandates because we want to serve all of our students, staff, faculty, and researchers. And accessibility efforts are really good for all users. And so when we share the links to these slides, you'll be able to get a link to our mandates. So in terms of accessibility, W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative mentions diverse abilities and barriers in relation to accessing the web. And these are diversity of abilities, auditory, cognitive, learning, neurological, physical, speech, and visual aspects. And within the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, it provides an international standard for web accessibility and levels and compliance. And so what's great is some of us have been talking about alternative text, also known as alt text, transcriptions, captioning, those have come up in earlier presentations, but we're going to focus on alt text for this presentation. So the old adage is a picture is worth 1,000 words, but alt text is really about 140 words, or is it? Because there's been some discussion that that 140 character limit with screen readers may no longer be an issue. And also it can be really hard sometimes to describe things down to only 140 characters. And here is one of my real life examples. In our digital repository, we actually do not have a description of this work. And for those of you to understand, this is a single cell comic strip from Richard F. Outcault, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, in 1896, titled A Wild Political Fight in Hogan's Alley, Silver Against Gold. And there are a bunch of historical references in here. I had to do a little research to look up what this is about. Apparently it refers to the 1896 presidential election, but this is not something that somebody is gonna, automatically know without doing some research. So there's definitely some challenges here. Having worked with our curators here, I'm also aware that the central character that you see down below with the text O'Brien is the yellow kid. So there's a little bit of domain expertise also needed here. And I feel like a curator could write a whole lot in an exhibit about this, but we have to deal with this in terms of, thousands of images. And what do we do? And we also have a lot more metadata in our records. So is the whole metadata record useful? So some of the concerns then that come up is, what does the metadata creator need to know about the image in order to create alt text? What does the user need to know about the image? And how can we describe this image with alt text? Is 140 characters even sufficient, or do we need more? And that's really a hot topic at my institution. So I'd like to liken what's going on with alt text for digital collections as using the iceberg analogy. So there's certain things that might be obvious or might not be. So above the iceberg, we might be able to see who it is, what the action is, what it is. Color can be very important, especially for individuals with color blindness, where it takes place, emotion. But context can be really difficult. Again, it can often require research to understand what's going on here. And we've had whole hour-long conversations about what is the context in an editorial cartoon. So another thing to consider below the iceberg is the creator's intent, the implicit bias of metadata creators, because we do have that, domain knowledge, in terms of the amount of space we have with alt text, complexity versus brevity, and ambiguity regarding gender identity, race, ethnicity, and age. And we have a lot of stakeholders that really want to express those concepts, but a lot of times it's not obvious. So other barriers we face are staffing, funding, time constraints, content expertise, buy-in and institutional support. And I want to say that even if you have accessibility mandates, getting support for doing this work is not a given, at least in order to make it really usable. And I want to share an example. A lot of us have records that have more than one image. And in this case, we have some glass slides that were scanned in different ways. So you have the traditional view, which is the transmitted light image, and the reflected light image. And the reason why we have the reflected light image is you can see there's some text on it. Well, maybe you can't. That could be important to the researcher, but we don't usually describe things on a file level with the title. And so a question might be, is that something we need to be using? And Julie's going to talk about that more. So handing it over to Julie.
Yes, hello. So in terms of the technology that we're using in the community here, a Hyrax-based application can encounter images in various ways. So one of those is this example of a single image showing in a IIIF viewer. So in this case that I'm showing here on the slide, it's through the universal viewer. So where does accessibility in terms of the alternative text for images come into play here? Is it with the embedded viewer, and does the title that's expressed here on this image work to serve as that alternative text description? It might in this case, but it doesn't necessarily always work. So there's a IIIF manifest behind this viewer that might have information that could be used in addition to just the title. But there doesn't necessarily appear to be a standard way for providing that in terms of alternative text at this point, at least not that I've been able to come up with. So there may be information that's out there. If there is a pattern for this, then I think it's something that's worth working with the IIIF community to make that more prominent and potentially include that information in our Hyrax documentation. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So within Hyrax, this is showing the attached file list, the file set list. Within Hyrax, the attached files can have titles, and that might also serve as alternative texts, like Anna was talking about. But in this case, it's the file name, so it's that's not necessarily working as well. This production example that I'm showing here is actually Hyrax in a 2.x version. So the file set thumbnail that's showing here does not actually have alternative text on it. And I do think that newer versions of Hyrax have addressed this issue. So I think that is something that's been corrected. But how does a user even know to dig down this far in the page, if the viewer is above this and is not giving that information, that alternative text information about the content of the image being viewed in the first place? So next slide, please. So this example is another one. It's a little harder to figure out how alternative text fits in here. The viewer still provides a title, but that title isn't explaining that it's a transcript file or that multiple pages are involved. So there are other parts within the viewer that might give that context, but it's not really an alternative text sort of offering of information. So next slide, please. The IIIF cookbook does show that there are ways to provide transcript access alongside various formats like newspapers or audio and video. But does that serve the role of alternative text for accessibility purposes in this case? And it's possible, but in the IIIF cookbook, it's not really talked about in those terms. Next slide, please. So, and then back to Hyrax, looking at the file set list for this multi-page document. How does alternative text for images work with the file set list for this? So again, this example has file names for titles on this, on the file set, but should alternative texts be provided here in some other way instead? So next slide, please. So digital collections are showing digital objects. So within Hyrax, we're seeing some places that alternative text might be possible or available on images, but how is that supplied? And how do we recommend that happening? Does that fulfill accessibility requirements? And does it actually increase accessibility for the digital collections that are accessed via Hyrax? Additionally, the IIIF viewer accessibility is something to consider. So how is alternative text for images supplied? If there's OCR or transcripts available for images with text, does that work for accessibility purposes? There's been discussion in the IIIF community about how to model transcript information so it can be made available in HTML, or where description of the image should be expected, considering an alternative text style description of what the image shows, or the transcription of text in the image, or even both, and if that should be part of the manifest. If there are options via IIIF now, providing that information along with our Hyrax documentation would assist organizations evaluating Hyrax or Hyku when considering accessibility. So how much of this is an issue that the larger arena of digital collection software and institutional repository software is managing? Reviewing other paths taken might also help us provide guidance or make changes to what we're doing for enhancing access to digital collections served through Samvera products. Next slide, please. So this is coming out of conversations in the metadata interest group. And it might also be coming up in the roadmaps alignment group a little bit within Samvera. So a UX study could help identify gaps in accessibility around alternative texts or accessible viewing of digital objects. If there are recommendations or documentation that the Samvera community can provide, or work that we can do with other communities like IIIF, that also seems like a good avenue to explore. If there are changes we need to make to Hyrax or other software products that we offer through the Samvera community, writing those up as issues in GitHub can help us prioritize and move that work forward. So next slide is just kind of, this is our contact information if you're interested in talking more about this or moving some of this along. Thank you.